welcome to the 8th episode of the Raceday review. As always, my name is Joe. I will be presenting, I am the host. I am the lead NASCAR writer for LineStar, a leading DFS analytics company. You could always find me on Twitter at JoeJets19. The YouTube channel for this video is youtube.com/backslash racedayReview. And we're streaming live on twitch.tv/JoeJets19. My DraftKings and FanDuel handles are also JoeJets19 if you want to check me out over there. We'll be going over the Bluegreen Vacations 500, which was not 500 miles or 500 laps. It was actually, they were measured the race out in kilometers for some unknown freaking reason, and it was a 500-kilometer race. Not too many races on the ticket on the season that do that. It always makes me laugh every time we get there. But that's just more information than anything that has to do with anything else. So the race wasn't all that exciting. A lot of people are giving it flack as it went on, and I know Jeff Gluck does a poll, and the last I saw of is it a good race or is it a bad race, and the poll had it at an 80-20 split, bad race to good race, which it happens. You can get duds every now and then, but since they're not really doing too much to the rules package next year, and this is going to be the championship race, not Homestead. They're moving Homestead up a couple of weeks. It's really not. It has a lot of people worried, but that's a whole year from now. So let's go over what happened yesterday, and we'll worry about next year. As always, we like to start off with the perfect lineup and what we were looking at going into the race. So what I was looking to target were 1 to 2 drivers starting in the top 10 that could lead laps. Most of the lap leaders came from the top 10 in the last 7 perfect lineups. I want to say all but one had one driver that led more than 100 laps. 2 or 3 of them had one driver that led 90 or so, between 80 and 90 laps, and another driver that led more than 100. There was actually one race where no one led more than 100 laps, and there is even one race where there's 1 or 2 races that more than 2 drivers or 2 drivers or more led more than 100 laps, but they didn't all make the perfect lineup. So I was really keying in on a 1 dominator lineup with possibly a 2 dominator lineup. There's in cash, we were going with a 2 dominator lineup just to be safe. I actually flipped that a little bit. In cash games, I prefer the 1 dominator look, and the reason is because if you miss the dominator, then you just have a really expensive dud. And in GPPs, I was going more for 2 dominators, and because you need the lap slide if you want to take down at this point, what I've been trying to do is either win a tournament or lose a tournament. We spoke about it last video that there are ways to be profitable in NASCAR where you just min cash your way through and see what happens. But that's fun and all. At the last couple of races, if you had a good season so far, that's when I really start looking to take one down. It doesn't always work out that way. You don't always take it down. It's a very high risk, high reward solution or strategy. But if you wanted to take down a GPP, you needed at least 2 dominators, and it turned out this ended up being a 3 dominator race. The people who started first, second, and third were all in the perfect lineup, which was much different than what we've seen traditionally at this racetrack. It was much more difficult to pass than previous races. Even the previous race this year, there was not nearly as many passes. There's only 1 green flag pass for the lead. Yeah, I'll give it 1 when Hamlin took over Logano. So it didn't shape up. We always knew that with this package, whoever's out front is going to be very hard to pass. It doesn't even matter if you really have that great of a car. That's what we'll see later on when we see Logano and some other things. But I was really aiming for 1 to 2 Dominator races. I didn't think this was going to turn out to be a 3 Dominator race. Even Logano was, if he dropped a couple of more spots, would have fell out of the perfect lineup. So that would have been a good strategy, but it turns out 3 Dominators, Team Jam-em-in works out in NASCAR every once in a while. With the 2 Dominators, I wanted at least 3 to 4 drivers that were going to finish in the top 12. That was really the mark. I wrote up in my article this week that I think only 6 drivers in the last 7 perfect lineups finished outside of the top 12. And that came with a couple of stars and scrubs lineups where they had to get 2 drivers that were under $6,000 that finished like 20th and 24th, and a couple times they had a couple of guys finishing like 18th and 22nd. But the majority of lineups had drivers that started within that started outside the top 12 and finished within the top 12. Some of the drivers didn't have to pick up too many spots. The lower price drivers had to do a little more work, but even if you can get a guy in like the $6,000 range that started 20th and finished 12th, that would have been more than enough. And then finally, worst comes to worst, if I wanted to play a two Dominator, if I wanted to play a 2 Dominator lineup, possibly a 3 Dominator lineup, I was going to need at least 1 driver under 6,000 to make it all fit, and that's what I was really aiming for this week. The backbone didn't work out too well because we did have 3 Dominators, and it really was a stars and scrubs weekend. 3 guys over $9,900 and 3 guys under $6,200 and below. But these were kind of these were drivers I had an eye out for. I'm going to start with Kyle Busch. He was the most expensive driver in the field, but he was starting on the pole, and playoffs mattered. I knew he was going to he could have got in there on points, but I knew he was going to aim for the win and try everything to win it, because who wants to deal with math when you can just win and be in? And that's the kind of driver he is. That's the kind of racer he is. So I was going to bet it all on Kyle Busch. I ended up playing him about 80% of lineups because there was a relatively low attrition rate. So I thought about 20% of drivers would have a problem, which ended up being right around there. It was less than 20% because a lot of these drivers were put many laps down because Hamlin was so freaking fast. But about a little more than around 30% of drivers finished more than 5 laps down, but it was mostly due to lack of speed than there really being too many car issues. So I felt pretty safe with Kyle Busch at 80% of lineups. And then what really made me look into him, and we'll go at the model. So Kyle Busch, he absolutely positively dominated here the last couple of races. He's finished first. He had an average finish in Phoenix of 2.8 in the last 5 races. That includes 2 consecutive wins plus another win in the previous. And he had more than 100 laps led in 3 of the last 5. And this all came when he wasn't on the pole. I didn't think he had the fastest car of the weekend. I thought that easily went to Hamlin. I thought Hamlin had the best car of the weekend. But Kyle Busch had a very good history here. He had a very good chance of leading laps here, and there was no reason. His car wasn't bad. His single laps times weren't great. His 10-lap average was top 10. But I knew he was going to have the clean air. I didn't think Logano could beat him off the block on the opening restart. So I really didn't have too much issue just playing as much Kyle Busch as possible. If it wasn't for Ricky Stenhouse Jr. hitting the wall for no fucking reason, he would have dominated much more than the 69 laps, the first 69 laps in the race. He lost it on the restart. Well, he lost it on the pit stop, which is unlike him. And then he had a poor restart, and he dropped to 5th, and he could never really get back up front. But finishing second, he did enough to pay off his salary, did enough to make it into the perfect lineup. And he was really my biggest target. That I was going to play him no matter what. And I had a couple of hedge lineups. Then my second most confident driver was going to be Hamlin. I know in chat we talked about who we thought was going to win the race. I thought Kyle Busch was the odds-on favorite. I then went with Hamlin. I After that it got a little murky. I liked Larson, I liked Blaney, I liked Harvick, and then Logano. I think Logano was my fifth or sixth choice because he really didn't have a great car. We'll get into that in a second. Let's talk about Hamlin first. Hamlin started third. He had the best 10 lap average, the best 15 lap average, the best 20 lap average, I believe, all in second practice. He had, let's go down to Hamlin. His previous history wasn't perfect. 13th average finish at 13.4 with a negative place differential, an average run position of 8, so he does run a little better than he finishes. He had a very good similar finish. A 7th place finish is not going to do me any good with his salary starting third, but his single lap speed was the weighted single lap average was 7th best, and his 10 lap average in second practice was the best. So he really had a car head and shoulders better than everyone else, and I had him about 45% of my lineups, which was, I think the field had him about 35%. So I went slightly overweight. I wasn't 100% confident in him because if he didn't get past, I was thinking that Kyle Busch was going to be my main dominator, and that's why I was so heavy on him, and I thought it was going to be a one dominator race. I had a lot of Kyle Busch only tournament lineups. So I thought as a hedge I would throw Hamlin in there. That was a expensive hedge. 10,600 is not a cheap hedge, but I liked a lot of the lower mid-price drivers, so it wasn't that hard to construct a lineup. The lineup didn't look like this for the most part. I had a lot of Hamlin, Kyle Busch, Ty Dillon lineups. Ty Dillon, it was on my radar from the beginning. We'll go over that, but I didn't have too much Logano. I 5 to 10%, which was really the difference from having a great day and a moderate day. All my hand-built lineups tanked because I didn't have any Logano, but I had a decent GPP day with my builds. I had 80 lineups going, and I had turned a small profit on those, but I ended up losing money on the day because of all my hand-built lineups did not work out in my favor. So Hamlin was not really much else you could say. He needed Logano, Hamlin, and Busch were all in the hunt for the playoffs. They were the 3, 4, and 5 drivers points-wise, and they shuffled throughout the day depending on who was leading. Kyle Busch was always pretty much holding on to the number 4 spot, as Logano and Hamlin were trading off number 3 for when they were trading off the lead. So, but they all needed to race for something, and they all raced their asses off, and that's why I really liked. I thought Kyle Busch and Hamlin were the best option, and then Logano wasn't really there for me. He didn't have a great car. He used good pit strategy to get up front, and then he just used the fact that he was up front, and he had the clean air to stay up there. But even Hamlin's team said they had to be patient. Hamlin spent about 68 laps just trying to run down Chase Elliott running in second, and everyone thought it was a real faulty move because why waste that much time running for second place? And the reasoning is because if you can start on the front row and then you can beat Logano off the front row, or at least be close enough that it was just you versus him with your Hamlin, Logano's car was going to fade, especially on the very long runs. He had a good car for about 40 to 50 laps, and then after that he kind of just fell off. He was able to catch a couple of cautions, and that's why he led more than a stage leg. But Hamlin was able to catch up to him once they went green for a long time, and once he got into second place, he knew that he'd be able to catch up to him once Logano's car fell off. And Logano didn't have a great average finish here. He actually had an okay, but not Logano-esque. Logano is a guy who will finish 7th, 8th, 9th, 5th, 6th, 7th at most tracks. So to him have an average finish worse than 10th means that he really doesn't run here. He hasn't been doing great at similar tracks this year. He had the 6th best single lap time, the 5th best 10 lap average, so his car was better than I expected. but it's still a clear third to the other two drivers between Kyle Busch and Hamlin, so I wasn't really that excited about Logano, but he ended up getting there. He fell back to 11th, just about. He came back to 8th. He got lapped before the late caution, which really just put a nail in his coffin. He wasn't able to unlap himself. So then we start getting to the value drivers. Yelly, once I found out that Yelly got pushed to the back because his qualifying time was disallowed, I almost wrote him up over Reagan, and the reason I didn't is because of this right here. I was looking for drivers with top 12 potential. Starting 39th, there was no way in God's green earth J.J. Yelly was going to finish in the top 12. Not going to do it. Didn't even come close. Finished 29th. That was all he needed this race. But I was looking at other drivers, and for a couple of $100 more, you could have gotten David Reagan. So for $500 more, which there actually was enough in the salary to have fit him. His his average finish was 27th. He had a similar finish of 27th also, but he had a couple of good finishes that were much better than where he was starting, and I thought he had a much higher ceiling. I was also surprised at Bubba Wallace, who I hate playing Bubba Wallace, but I split my ownership between Reagan and Wallace. Wallace was starting 23rd. He had an average finish of 20th. He had a best finish of 12th, which is what I was looking for. And he had not a great car, but I thought over the 500 kilometers he'd be able to work his way through. I didn't expect passing to be nearly as hard as it actually was, but it turned out to be nearly impossible. Ty Dillon, starting 29th, finishing 20th. Dillon was on my radar. I like both Dillon brothers this week. He was starting 29th. He had an average finish here of 18.2, which is great for his price. He had a average run position of 21st. He had an average picked up 6 spots a race. Even in his similar finish position of 23rd was, for the price, you couldn't really beat it. His practice times weren't great, but I knew I had a great chance of picking up at least a top 20 from Ty Dillon, and then his brother Austin Dillon for 6,800, only a little bit more, 6,500 on FanDuel. He had a better average finishing position at similar tracks and a better average finishing position at Phoenix. He practiced much better also, and he was only starting a place forward. So for the extra couple of dollars, I thought for sure that he would be able to at least pick up a top 20 and really had top 15 ceilings. I had his projected finishing position as a 14th, his ceiling as a 13th, and then his floor is 29th. He finished 24th. He picked up a couple of spots, but that's not something I was really hoping for. So, and Hemrick. Sorry, I almost skipped over Hemrick. There was a lot of people looking in this area for value. And so you had Hemrick at 6,100. I'm going to sort this by starting position. So you had Hemrick, Ty Dillon, Austin Dillon, all starting in the same area. Then you had Preece, Stenhouse Jr., Wallace. So this is a very popular area, the high 20s, because everyone knew you're going to have to reach in here to fit in some of the studs, and they just didn't know what combination. I went with a lot of Bubba, Austin, and Ty were my big guys, and then David Reagan was who I really balanced out with. I didn't too much of any of these drivers. I should have had, in hindsight, I should have had more Yelly, but even then I thought he was a very low ceilings. So I made my player pool to balance out were a lot of guys. I had some Jimmy Johnson, some Bubba Wallace, some Stenhouse Jr. I really love Stenhouse Jr. here as a play. He's always boom or bust. I call Bubba Wallace Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I also do that to Eric Jones. I really think Eric Jones is Ricky Stenhouse Jr. But that being said, I thought Stenhouse had a great ceiling. His practice times were better than where he started. His average finishes were better. He actually finished 19th. I thought he had a top 15 car roughly, just based on who is starting in front of him. And I thought he would stop up a lot of ownership, and Priest would stop up a lot of ownership. So I thought that Hemrick would be a decent pivot. I actually had some of him, not a ton, but probably about 25%, which was right around the field. He, as always, he was one of those drivers that always qualifies well and falls back. As you see, he qualified 11th and finished 18th in the earlier race here. He usually qualifies in the 20s and loses a couple of spots. I thought since he was starting in 27th, he had a chance to move up a little bit. And all he needed to do was pick up 6 spots to end up being in the perfect lineup. So that was a great option. This is a very profitable way. I really was looking more for a more balanced lineup, so I had some William Byron starting 8,300 starting, I want to say 18th. His average finishing position here was 15th. His average finishing position at similar tracks was 11th. So that was very good. His practice times, again, weren't awesome. Practice wasn't great this week. A lot of people practiced much worse than they qualified, and that was just really a pain in my ass. Very hard to differentiate when that happens. So I had a projected finish of 17th in the model that I posted, but I really thought that he had a chance to do better than that. I thought that was closer to his floor, and I had a floor of 25th and a ceiling of 6th, which would have been nice. I didn't have any Menard. He wasn't very popular, but he was in a winning. He wasn't in a winning lineup, but he was in a second place lineup. Speaking of winning lineups, let's go to them. So the $11 first gear for 100,000 was Kyle Busch, Ty Dillon, Hamlin, Hemrick, Logano, Nemechek made it in there, and Nemechek instead of Yelly. It was not the perfect lineup, but the $4 did manage to be the perfect lineup. Sorry, my son woke up, so I'm going to have to go through this a little bit quicker than I would have originally anticipated, but you know how that goes. So, looking at this, just going through the field real quick, we talked about Kyle Busch, we talked about Logano, Hamlin. Truex I wrote off entirely because I heard he was working on a skeleton crew, and he really didn't have a great finish here. Kyle Larson, I had a dark horse. I thought that I actually put a bet on Larson and Hamlin to win the championship because they're the only guys I can get a good money on or a good line on. Larson was like 22-1 and Hamlin was 12-1. So I still have the Hamlin bet. I bet that on Thursday, but he had to do a little bit more work. But I thought Larson had an outside shot of upsetting the race and being a winner. And then if he got to Homestead, I thought he'd have a good shot. He could have gotten there on the last restart. In the last yellow, everyone in front of him pitted, so he could have just stayed out. It turned out that 2 tires is better than 4. Maybe no tires would have beat them all. Shoulda, woulda, coulda. Chase Elliott crashed out. Didn't really have too much of him. I had some Harvick just in case the tried and true ended up winning. We'd be able to get both of them. It was expensive to make a Kyle Busch and Harvick lineup, but I was able to do it. Didn't work out, but I was able to do it. No real interest in Kurt Busch or Jones. Blaney, I kind of liked as another dark horse. His similars were not awesome, but boy, did he have a fast car. He probably had the only car to rival Hamlin, but he was not able to get there. He ended up finishing 3rd, so he's out of the championship, and he needed a win, but Lord, he had a very fast car this entire weekend. He just couldn't really do too much passing. Neither could anyone else. Almirola was another low-owned option that I thought he was starting 11th. I thought he'd be able to finish like a top 7 and make it into the perfect lineup. For the price, I thought that would be a sneaky play. The sneak worked out for me last week. Did not work out for me this week. Keselowski didn't have a ton of interest in. Neither did I have interest in Boyer, Bowman, Suarez. DiBenedetto I thought was going to be very highly owned. considering his terrible, absolutely terrible history here, and his not. I mean, he has a good history at similar tracks, but not anything compared to his 16th starting position. But he did practice very well, and people take back practice a lot. So I had to have some ownership of him just to hedge, but um, he ended up working out pretty well, but not nearly as well as people were hoping for. Newman was another one of my guys I was thinking was going to be lower owned. He had a great history here. I thought he'd be able to finish. That my top 12 category was what I really thought that he would shine with. He didn't get there. He never really got too much going for him. He finished 16th, which is nice. He picked up a couple of spots, but not nearly enough to pay off his salary. McDowell qualified too well, and I didn't have any idea. No Nemecheks, no LaJoy qualified too well too, and he didn't really have that fast of a car. As I always go over, I look for drivers in this range. I look for drivers who practice better than they qualified, and almost none of them did, except for Yelly. So, a quick look into Homestead. Every race, every time that there's been a championship race at Homestead, the winner of the championship has won the race. So you know what? That's my Dominator pool. It's going to be Hamlin, Harvick, Truex, or Kyle Busch. They all have their own claim to fame, so you're really going to have to dig into practice times, dig into anything like that. I will say Truex is a master of races that start in the day and end in the night, so I think the start time is going to be about 3:30. You're probably going to get about 50 laps run, maybe, roughly. One in the dusk nighttime, so if there's any sort of late caution, there was one year that there was a red flag late for almost a full hour, and the race ended under the lights. If that were to happen here, I would give a huge boost to Truex Jr., but these are really who I'm aiming for. I'm going to build all of my lineups around the 4 drivers. There really isn't a bad pick of the bunch. Hamlin has been lights out all season. Kyle Busch and Truex Jr. actually haven't been as good as you usually would expect at similar tracks. So I'm really going to be focusing all of my attention on picking out who I want. I'll probably have a little bit of ownership of these 4, and then you got to kind of build your team around that. Sorry I kind of raced through that. It happens. I will have one more recap video at the end of Homestead. Please, if you're watching this, like it, review it, rate it, leave a comment. One guy left a comment on the last video. Made me kind of happy. Taking notes, didn't really get that, but I'm down with it. So any way you want to reach out, I'm always by Twitter or anything like that. Thank you, and good luck next week.